Yeah, please. I want to see this. That's what I mean. Good, everybody. Great. Good morning. It is my privilege to introduce today's Chief Talk speaker, Dr. Christopher Cramer. Chris earned his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Baldwin Wallace University before completing his Doctor of Medicine and Master of Science in Clinical Research here at the University of Virginia. Throughout residency, Chris has distinguished himself through his dedication to surgical education. He established a grant-funded cadaver-based laparoscopic simulation course for the incoming interns, a program he built from the ground up with collaboration with the Surgical Simulation Center. He has served as an instructor across numerous simulation and skills-based courses, has been a facilitator for the Resident Robotics Bootcamp, and something he's very proud of, he is the recipient of the prestigious Golden Trokar Award in the Robotic Surgery Olympics. His research contributions span clinical outcomes in surgical oncology and thoracic surgery, with multiple publications in several peer-reviewed journals. Following the completion of his training here, Chris will be pursuing a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery with a particular interest in lung transplantation. Outside of medicine, Chris is an avid golfer, runner, and cyclist. On a personal level, anyone who spends much time with Chris knows that the true joy of his life is being a husband to his beautiful wife, Paige, and a very proud father to his daughters, Cora and May. Chris is known to his co-residents and faculty as a confident, wise surgeon with an excellent clinical acumen. He is an incredible friend, and it has been a privilege to train alongside him. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christopher Cramer.
Thanks, Alicia. So, good morning. My name's Chris. I'm one of the General Surgery Chief Residents. Today I'm going to give a talk about artificial intelligence, recognizing that, we hear a lot about AI. My goal for this talk is not to be some really in the weeds talk about the cutting edge of where AI is going. Instead, what I'm hoping to show you is some practical uses for the tools that are available today to everyone in this room, and how the ways that average users go wrong using the tools that are available. I have no disclosures. So there's 3 objectives for today. All of them are practical. First and foremost, my hope is that you'll be able to use and apply AI-assisted workflows to at least one daily aspect in your life in some sort. Second, hopefully you'll be able to evaluate AI-generated responses for errors in content. And last, you'll be able to evaluate when it's appropriate to use AI tools for clinical and professional tasks based on the strengths and faults with AI as it relates to the importance of the task itself. The goal is to help you work more efficiently and not compromise quality. So before we begin, I want to take a quick minute to show a video. This was generated in 2023, or starting in 2023, just 3 years ago. There's audio, not like that. So there's also AI generated voice to this video that's not playing right now. So the first clip, as I mentioned, was generated in 2023, and it was AI generated video 3 years ago. The faces were distorted, the fingers were melting, the physics seemed random. And you compare that with what the same technology produces today in just 3 short years. AI went from making funny video clips to generating photorealistic video, complete with audio that's also AI generated, that's nearly indistinguishable from real footage to most viewers. That pace of improvement is not slowing down. And while the internet was focused on obvious failures of AI, it quietly became capable of some pretty amazing stuff that we all have access to today. Like I said, I know that we're all tired of hearing about AI. It's everywhere in the news. It's constantly being discussed in various forms of media. But whether we like it or not, I believe that these tools are improving faster than most people can track, and in all likelihood, they're here to stay. They're saving time on specific tasks. They're already integrated into the software on our phones and in our hospitals, and they're increasingly embedded in clinical workflows and medical education. It feels chaotic because it is, and that's what the early phase adoption looks like for general purpose technology. To note, caveat, I am not an expert in this, and there are certainly people that probably know more about AI in this room than I do. But I just wanted to share what I've learned so far and what's worked for me and what hasn't, and to let you decide yourselves whether or not any of it can apply to your life. So we already trust AI more than we realize. Your car brakes for you through anti-lock braking systems and collision avoidance systems. Your bank blocks fraudulent transactions in milliseconds. Your phone filters out a vast majority of phishing emails before we even see them. Every time you send a text message, your phone finishes the sentence, and that's a language model. It is the core technology behind ChatGPT, just smaller. Face ID, Spotify recommendations, Google Maps, routing you through traffic in real time, and weather models predicting a hurricane's path 5 days out. These are all various types of AI systems running continuously in the background. The question is not whether we should use AI, we already do. The question is whether we should use it deliberately or only when someone else has decided for us. So, like I said, I'm not going to get into the weeds of exactly how all these forms of AI work, because frankly, I couldn't tell you that. But the examples that I just described, like fraud detection, weather models, traffic routing, are all different forms of specialized systems, each trained to do one thing well. What we're discussing today is a little bit different, and that's generative AI. Generative AI is the kind of AI that you type to, like ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini. These are large language models that work in a specific way. Briefly, generative AI predicts the most likely next word in a sentence or in a sequence based on patterns that it's trained on in billions of text documents. Think of it as a vastly more sophisticated version of your phone's text prediction. Your phone guesses your next word based on how you usually write. A large language model does the same thing, but it has been trained on enormous amounts of data, so its predictions are extraordinarily capable. At the end of the day, it's still predicting the next word, though. It doesn't know anything. It just generates statistically like a text. So next we'll get into how anyone in this room can get started if you haven't already used AI, which would be a little surprising. I'm sure many of you are already using tools like ChatGPT, so just bear with me for those of you that are familiar. If you've never used something like ChatGPT before, it's super easy to start. Just go to a website, download the app on your phone. You can create a free account with an email and password alone. You can create it's usually free to start if you want. Then the rest is up to you. Today we'll talk about some ways to ease the learning curve with getting started though. There's no software that you need to install, and there's no subscription that's absolutely required. So this slide here is to answer the first question many people ask, and that is, which do you use? Because there's a lot out there now. The short answer is that it really doesn't matter too much, especially at the beginning. The top three in the table, Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini, are all excellent. They're all free to start, and they're all capable of everything that I'm going to show today. Claude is made by Anthropic and tends to be strong at writing, coding, and nuanced reasoning. ChatGPT is made by OpenAI, and it's one of the most widely used here in the United States, with a large ecosystem of features. Gemini is Google's offering, and it integrates well with the Google Workspace environment. Below those, Microsoft Copilot is worth noting because most of us already work in the Microsoft space, and it's already being integrated into the Microsoft workflow. Perplexity is a little bit different in that it functions more like an AI-powered search engine, and it'll cite sources in real time, which makes it useful for quick clinical questions. Meta AI is free and has a standalone app, and it's integrated into things like WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. So many of you already have access to it without downloading anything new. And then just to briefly mention, DeepSeek is the Chinese AI version that offers a free chatbot like ChatGPT, and it has strong reasoning capabilities that rivals many of the systems that we use in the US. All these have free tiers. All of them have mobile apps for iOS and Android. And the important point from this is that don't really spend too much time comparing between the various ones. Try to pick the quote-unquote best one. Just pick one and start with it to learn the workflow. Personally, I use Claude. So now that you have ChatGPT or whatever you choose to use, how do you use it? The question is just ask it a question or tell it to do something in natural language. So this is the very starting point of where what you do kind of matters. And the input starts to matter. So the internet's come up with several ways to test AI's ability to solve problems, which, like I said before, AI doesn't solve problems, it just generates statistically likely text. So one example that the internet likes to use is the car wash problem. The question is to AI, if you type in, I live 50 meters away from the car wash, should I walk or drive? Many models will confidently say that you should walk and then give reasoning to do so. However, the assumption that AI needs to make to answer this question is that regardless of the distance, the assumption is that we need to get our car washed. So in this case, the AI model makes a reasonable prediction based on incomplete context. It assumes that since you live close to the car wash, that you should just walk. And that's reasonable based on incomplete context. So this is the one of the most common failure modes that you'll encounter. It's not a sophisticated error. AI simply didn't have the full picture. The solution is not better AI, it's providing more context. So this is familiar with clinical practice. A consult with an incomplete history is a bad consult. A prompt with incomplete context is a bad prompt. The errors are often not because AI is incapable, but because the model needs adequate context and guidance, and that's almost always within your control. The single biggest mistake I used to make with AI was being too vague. If you type write a letter, you'll get a generic, unusable letter that was obviously written by AI. But if you give AI more details and specifications to work with, you get something that you can actually use as a first draft. The principle is straightforward. The more context you provide, the better the output will produce. It's like if I called Dr. Friel in the middle of the night and I said, hey, we've got a guy in the ED with abdominal pain and free air. When do you want me to book him? You can imagine the type of response I might get back at 2 o'clock in the morning. But if I was more specific and I told my reasoning and gave the clinical context, it would be a bit of a different conversation. So here I've just included a generic framework that I find to be useful, but ultimately each task that you want to use AI for is going to have its own unique considerations. So then the question is, how do you know what to type into AI? How do you make a good prompt? So one of the good techniques that I've learned to use is to improve your output is that when you're not sure of the details to include is to let AI create the details. Instead of spending time crafting the perfect prompt, type something like, before you start, ask me 5 to 10 questions about what I need so you can give me the best possible answer. The AI will then ask targeted questions that pull out details that you may not have thought to include. For example, if you need to prepare a research presentation, the AI could ask about the topic, the audience, the length, and the key message that you're hoping to impart. If you're preparing for the AB site, it could ask what year you are in training, when the exam is, and what your areas of weakness were on the last time. If you're writing recommendation letters, you can provide AI with previous letters that you have written, so it can try to match your style and tone. The results read more so as though you wrote it, because the structure and phrasing come from your own prior work. So AI without context is guessing. AI with your documents and reference files is closer to reasoning. If you ask AI to summarize a paper from the internet using its general knowledge, you'll get unreliable input. If you paste the actual paper and ask it to summarize the specific text from that paper, the output is more grounded in your document and will be far more reliable. Some examples for research, you could try to copy a set of papers into the chat and ask a question, whether that is for gaps in the provided literature or for a summarization of multiple papers. For study design, you can paste protocols that you've written before and ask the AI to design a new protocol in the same format with your specifications. For learning, copy and paste reading material and ask it to quiz you on the material with questions or clinical scenarios. For teaching, you can paste relevant guidelines or chapters and ask it to generate whatever teaching material you want in the style that you want. The more narrow that you make the input, the lower the error rate and the better the results. And finally, another principle related to improving output quality is you can name specific experts or established frameworks in your prompts to produce better reasoning. If you ask AI for a generic approach to rectal cancer, you're going to get output that's comparable to what you might find on a generic website like Medscape. If you ask how a specific expert in that area would approach it, the output tends to be a little bit more thoughtful and specific to what you need, while also being grounded in real data and recommendations. Using the same example, you'll get better output regarding the management of rectal cancer if you can point it to the NCCN guidelines. If you're unsure who the leading experts are in a particular area, following the theme, you can ask AI who the experts are, and then you can follow up with your own independent search and then point it to the experts that you think are going to be most valuable to your application. You can ask AI to provide citations also to use it for cross-verification, given AI does have access to the internet now. So next we'll talk about a couple ways that we can incorporate AI into clinical practice. So the first and foremost, something that we already have here, DAX Copilots and Ambient AI Scribe that's already available. The workflow is pretty straightforward, as those of you who already use it probably already know. You see the patient, you speak naturally during the encounter, DAX on your phone usually listens in the background and generates a structured clinical note in real time that you can then review and sign. Several people here are already using it, and published evidence is pretty compelling. So some tips to start using it. First, speak clearly and state your clinical reasoning aloud, not just the findings. That helps the model synthesize your decision-making into the note. Second, talk through the findings and pertinent information out loud while reviewing the chart before seeing the patient so that it can automatically include this information in your note. And finally, always review the note before you sign it. Check that the past medical history is correct, that the HPI captures the actual visit, and that the assessment and plan match what you said. Reviewing takes a small amount of time, but for AI tools these days, it's non-negotiable. So just a few studies worth noting. Tierney reported that the Kaiser Permanente rolled out DAX to over 7,200 physicians and measured approximately 16,000 hours saved, the equivalent of 1,800 working days in a single year. Another study by U measured physician burnout before and after implementation of ambient AI scribes across multiple sites. Subjective reporting of burnout dropped from 50% to 29% after just 42 days of using the tool. And finally, a study by Ganem tested DAX on simulated surgical encounters, and the notes generated by DAX scored 47 out of 50 by their scoring system, with 0 hallucinations and 0 bias detected by physician reviewers. The published evidence overall is mixed, and not every study that I've posted here looked at demonstrated dramatic benefits, and some showed more modest results. But these 3 are among the most compelling. The technology is already available for those that you want to try out yourself. So here's an example of AI in a practical workflow that can be applicable to any of us as residents, and especially junior residents. So if I was smarter as a junior resident, I would have made a list of things that I needed for common bedside procedures to reference. But instead, I just did it live every single time and tried to remember it all off the top of my head every time. Inevitably, I'd forget something. So this is a photo, some random stuff I got from the ICU supply room. I took the picture. I told the model that I'm planning to do a bedside IND of perianal abscess, and I asked if I had everything that I needed. It took 5 to 10 seconds to generate an answer. The first part of the answer, output, which I didn't picture here, listed what it identified in the picture. This was almost completely correct, but it thought I had 2 hemostats, when in reality, one of these instruments is scissors. I could have corrected it at this point, but truthfully, it was unnecessary. The rest of the output, which is pictured here, listed everything that I could have imagined might be helpful or needed for a bedside IND. For routine stuff like this is just a 30-second check. The hallucination risk here is low because it's a constrained task. Matching a photo to a checklist is pattern matching and not open-ended reasoning. So here's another real example that I could have used AI in the recent past. So for this one, I typed vague, non-identifying case details from a recent M&M presentation. A patient who underwent an LAR for a large, low-lying rectal polyp that was biopsied and found to be benign. The patient unfortunately had a leak, and I was curious to see how well Claude would do with preparation for the discussion of the M&M. It's pretty straightforward. I described the case in 2 sentences and asked what I should be prepared for from the audience. There's no de-identified patient data, no protected health information, just the clinical scenario. So I apologize that the text is a little small here. This is what Claude gave me in less than 30 seconds of thinking. It organized the anticipated questions into 4 categories: indication for surgery, why an LAR resection was being done for benign polyp, were endoscopic alternatives considered, was a transanal approach considered. It even came up with the idea of getting a second opinion from an advanced endoscopist. Similarly, with several considerations for discussion in the preoperative workup and technical aspects. How low was the anastomosis? Were there risk factors like steroids or nutritional status? Interestingly, the last sentence here probably would have been helpful to me when I actually gave this M&M, which is being able to clearly articulate why endoscopic and transanal alternatives were not feasible. Obviously, this doesn't cover every single discussion point, and some of the discussion points that it brings up aren't totally relevant, but it does catch a significant number of the important considerations for less than a minute of work. It wouldn't completely replace the need for thinking about the discussion myself, but it would certainly be a pretty good starting point. With respect to studying and board preparation, AI can be useful for medical students, residents, or even faculty of any level. AI can generate board-style questions in seconds. If you feel reasonably confident in your own knowledge, you can ask it to generically generate board-style questions on a certain topic. Given my concern for hallucinations that AI provides, like made-up text in contexts like these, I'd recommend providing some source material for it to generate the questions from first. For example, you can provide the copy-pasted text from a textbook chapter and ask it to generate board-style questions from the content that you provided. If you don't have an electronic version of the textbook, you can get creative. So you can just take a picture of the textbook page and upload the picture to the model, and it can still use that even though it's not typed text itself. AI can also generate teaching cases for various levels of medical training. For example, you can ask it to generate a progressive disclosure style question for medical students on right upper quadrant pain, or a similar style or oral board style question in the topic of your choice. Sorry. And again, you can even provide the text from an oral board prep book or resource that you like to use for oral board prep and ask it to use the provided case scenarios to stimulate an exam scenario. Depending on the model you use, you can refine the AI style of asking these style questions from something that doesn't really, the output will go from something that doesn't really feel like a real life simulation to something that's actually pretty close to what we do. The more you use it and the more you work with it beyond just the superficial level, the better you'll become and better it becomes tailored to your individual needs and preferences. Finally, I'll put a little plug in for one of my co-residents, Dr. Elma Head, who's currently working on a free-to-use oral board simulation product that hopefully we'll be hearing about soon, but more of that to come in the future. Throughout medical school training and most of residency, one of the go-to resources for finding concise information was the website UpToDate, which gives a quick, concise article for diagnosis, management, and treatment of various problems. AI options have become much more available within the space and more useful. It's often just as capable, providing more updated information, and it's often faster to use too. Various AI platforms like ChatGPT and Claude can search the internet real time and answer questions while providing citations. You do have to be careful and to double check that the citations it's providing are actually real. For medical questions specifically, there's Open Evidence, which is a free tool that physicians have access to, and it only requires an NPI number to register. It's HIPAA compliant, it has partnerships with the New England Journal and JAMA, and every answer that it provides cites specific peer-reviewed sources with applicable PubMed links. It's a little bit different in that it uses retrieval augmented generation architectures, meaning every claim that it provides is grounded in actual studies rather than general knowledge. In a 2024 vendor-validated study, Open Evidence answered all 325 questions correctly on a training set of the USMLE sample questions. The key distinction from general-purpose tools like ChatGPT is that with Open Evidence, every single answer that it provides cites a source that you can verify immediately by just clicking a link. Another useful way to use AI is to help streamline your life with reviewing journal articles. You can provide the PDF of a full journal article into the AI of your choice and specify what exactly you want from it. You could ask for a quick paragraph summary with a one-sentence overall conclusion. You could have it create a full detailed bullet-pointed summary for each section of the manuscript, or you can ask it to do anything in between based on what you want it to do. A journal club format might ask for things like discussion points, methodological weaknesses, and how the results might change under different conditions. You could ask it to compare and evaluate the current article in the context of other similar articles within a certain time frame. One important caveat here is that AI tools can fabricate PubMed IDs and citations that look entirely real but don't actually exist. You always have to verify the citations by searching them in PubMed before you use them in any context. In my opinion, this should also not entirely replace reading through the article yourself at least once, but it can help synthesize information concisely after you've gone through the article yourself. The last tool that I wanted to bring up, which truthfully I haven't used a ton myself yet, but it's on the docket, and that's Notebook LM, which is a Google product, and it loosely fits into the section of clinical applications. I think this is a tool worth knowing about because it directly addresses the hallucination problem of AI generating incorrect or untrue text. The key difference from generative AI models is that it only works from sources that you provide. It doesn't use general internet knowledge. Every answer is grounded in the documents that you provide with citations pointing back to the exact text that you provide. You can upload PDFs, Google Docs, websites, YouTube transcripts, PowerPoint slides, or whatever you want. Just to touch on a few cool features that it offers. First, it can generate audio overviews. You can upload a textbook chapter and ask it to generate a podcast-style discussion material between two AI hosts. Now, I was actually just doing this in the workroom before this talk, and it's almost creepy, the level of detail and how much it sounds like a real podcast. There's an interactive mode where you can ask questions during the discussion. The podcast that it generates will pause to synthesize your question and the material that you provided it and answer the question. Second, it can generate instant study tools like flashcards, quizzes with answer keys, study guides, and timelines, all from your uploaded documents. And third, its chat function returns cited answers referencing the specific document and passage. The hallucination risk is overall much lower because it's constrained to the sources that you upload. It cannot fabricate citations from papers that you did not provide. Practical applications would be board preparation, journal preparation, generating study guides. The caveat here is that the quality of the output depends on the quality of the documents that you upload. So that's a broad overview of some of the basic things AI can do in a clinical or academic context. But there's quite a bit more depth into the various tools that I'm not going to cover. But just know that the capabilities can be much greater than what I even just discussed. Next, we'll discuss some of the downsides and pitfalls of using AI. So there's several ways and reasons that AI can and will fail. First and perhaps foremost, recall that generative AI is predicting the most likely next word. Errors made from the generation of incorrect information are called hallucinations. AI-generated content that sounds real, but it's fabricated. Citations with plausible PubMed IDs that don't actually exist, or statistics that sound authoritative but have no basis. Quotes that are attributed to people who never said them. This is the most common and one of the most dangerous failure modes because the output looks convincing. Next is context blindness. It misses information that you did not explicitly provide and fills the gaps with assumptions. This is similar to the car wash problem. Third is sycophancy. AI often tends to agree with what you're typing or what you imply, even if you're wrong. So if you suggest an incorrect diagnosis in your prompt, AI will often build a case supporting it rather than pushing back. It's optimized to be helpful, but not to challenge you. Fourth, authority mimicry. It adopts an expert tone regardless of whether or not the content is accurate. It sounds like a specialist, whether it's summarizing a real guideline or a fabricated one. And fifth is anchoring bias. AI often over-indexes on the first piece of information or framing that you provide. If you lead with a specific diagnosis, the reason is used towards confirming it rather than considering the full differential. The last example here is temporal blindness. It may not know about guidelines or studies published after its training data, and it'll confidently cite outdated recommendations as current. These are 6 patterns that account for a large proportion of errors that you'll encounter. The key insight here is that AI does not flag uncertainty unless you ask it to. It gives you an answer that sounds authoritative, even if it's fabricating. So one of my goals was to not include a bunch of research in this talk, but to discuss practical uses. But given the overall importance of AI hallucination as a broad error mode, I found a few recent studies that explore this topic. So the question is, how often does AI hallucinate? The answer depends on the task, and the range is pretty large. There's a meta-analysis in JCO that looks over 39 studies with over 6,500 AI responses to ontologic questions. They found that approximately 23% contained inaccurate information, which is roughly 1 in 4. A study in Nature Partner Journal's Digital Medicine in 2025 found that for structured text summarization, the hallucination rate was only 1.5%. But of those, physicians rated 44% of those errors as major errors. And finally, in communications medicine in 2025, when researchers deliberately planted false information under adversarial conditions, 50 to 83% of models repeated or elaborated on the false claim that they made rather than identifying it and correcting the mistake. Overall, the range is enormous, from under 1.5% to over 80%. And depending on the task and the model, and probably most importantly, your input, the lowest error rates occur when you constrain the task and give AI a closed set of sources. The highest rates occur when you ask it to synthesize information from its training data alone. So 2 additional concerns that are worth noting in my mind. First, the AI voice problem, as you guys probably already seen in your day-to-day life. AI-generated text has a recognizable prose style. For documents where authenticity matters, where the reader expects that you wrote it, AI text can undermine credibility. Second is the knowledge practice gap. There's a 2025 study, systematic review, that found that AI scores 82% on standardized exam vignettes, but it drops to just under 63% on real multi-turn clinical dialogues with actual patients. Only 5% of 761 large language model evaluation studies assess performance on real patient care data. Exams are clean and self-contained, and real patients give incomplete histories, present atypically, and have overlapping problems that often contradict themselves. When someone argues that AI will replace physicians because open evidence can score 100% on step exams, this gap is worth noting. These are structural limitations of the current generation of AI. Knowing about them prevents over-reliance in domains where the stakes are high and the data is complex. Here's another practical checklist to verify most types of AI outputs, whether reviewing literature summaries or a set of board questions or a drafted email. One is read the output fully and don't skim. AI errors hide in confident, fluent prose, and skimming is how fabricated citations and plausible sounding statistics get through. 2 is check the facts. This is broader than just checking the citations. If the output contains a specific claim, like a citation, a statistic, a clinical recommendation, or a dosing guideline, you need to verify it against the primary source. You can even try asking AI to provide the sources for each claim. 3 is test for context. Did you give AI enough information to answer the question correctly? If the output feels generic or misses your point, the problem is usually the input, not the model. 4, look for what is missing. AI tells you what fits the pattern, but it doesn't tell you what it left out. A differential diagnosis that omits the most life-threatening possibility, or a recommendation letter that fails to mention a key strength. These are errors of omission, and AI will not flag them for you. Again, if you're concerned that something is missing, though, you can always try following up your original prompt by asking AI to reconsider if it's missing anything. Lastly, ask, would you sign this or endorse this? If you would not put your name on the product as is, whether it's an opt-note or a recommendation letter, presentation, or an email, you need to edit it until you would. These 5 steps aren't perfect, but they catch a vast majority of errors before they become a problem. So if AI hallucinates and is loaded with flaws, then why would we use it at all? The answer that I've come up with is that with the flaws, including the hallucinations, it doesn't totally negate all of its utility. It just changes how you should think about it and how you should use the tool. All the tools that we use, both in medicine and in the rest of our lives, have failure modes. Ultrasound misses findings, CT produces artifacts, lab values have false positive rates, but that doesn't mean we should stop using them. We learn the failure modes and adjust accordingly. Some considerations to make in living with AI and its flaws. First, constrain the source material, like I mentioned before. Give the AI the actual text that you want to use, like the chapter, the guideline, or the paper, and instruct it to work only primarily from that material. The more narrow you can make the input, the lower the hallucination rate, as the study that I just alluded to showed. Notebook LM, for example, which I discussed earlier, does this by design. Second, use the AI for drafts and not final products. It generates the structure in the first pass, but you can morph it into the product that you want and provide the judgment. Third, verify before you trust. Being critical of the output should not be an optional part of the process for tasks that are sensitive to accuracy. It's one of the costs of using these tools. Fourth, match the tool to the risk level. Asking AI to provide some ideas for an M&M topic or for M&M discussion or supplies needed for a bedside procedure are low stakes. A dosing recommendation for a real patient should not be determined with AI. Finally, and maybe the most important point, is recognize that your expertise and judgment is the safeguard for these tools. AI cannot replace the knowledge that you need to evaluate its output. A surgeon who knows the anatomy for a procedure will catch the error in the operative note. Without domain knowledge, it can become incredibly difficult and cumbersome to distinguish good output from bad. The question is not whether AI makes mistakes. It does, and it will. The question is, how do you use the tool in light of that? So next, we'll talk about some ways that you can use these outside of the hospital. This will be a little more brief. So everything I've discussed so far has been about clinical work, academic work, or adjacent topics. But the same skills using AI can be applied throughout your life in other ways. So for residents working 70 to 80 hours a week, the tasks that accumulate outside the OR, like meal planning, training schedules, travel, home maintenance, can be addressed using the same tools that we just discussed. For one example, I pasted a prompt into Claude and asked it to build a 16-week training plan for someone cycling 4 days a week, starting at 3:45 in the morning with moderate baseline fitness, working 70 hours a week. It returned a fully structured plan, including rest days, specific workouts, and considerations to make. The plan needed adjustments, but I was able to refine it significantly by using various techniques that I discussed earlier. And it provided a solid starting framework in less than 30 seconds. It's actually pretty amazing with what you can make it do in your real life. You can ask it to help with meal preparation by providing it ingredients, food preferences, or whatever details you want to specify. It can help build a nutrition plan depending on your goals with various constraints in mind. It can help organize your life. For example, I asked it to make a seasonal checklist, ensuring I'm staying on top of home maintenance tasks throughout the year. It can help with travel planning by brainstorming ideas and creating a travel itinerary based on your travel goals, location, and budget. Many of these are examples of places in my own life where it's provided value via idea and time savings. So here's a picture I took of a wine list from the local a few weeks ago. I took a picture with my phone, uploaded it to the Claude app directly via my phone, and asked it for a wine recommendation based on preferences. It quickly identified a couple options, explained why they fit my preferences, and flagged the regions and grape varieties. The value here is not that AI is an expert sommelier who's going to pick the perfect wine for me. The value is that it reduces decision-making friction for tasks where a reasonable answer is sufficient. Alternatively, I could have done what I normally do, which is randomly pick a wine based on limited information, but this does seem like an improvement. For what it's worth, the wine was actually pretty decent. Here's another example of me maximizing laziness in my own life, for what I refer to as efficiency. This example is similar to the one before with the bedside procedure. Instead here, I was curious how AI would do with meal preparation. My usual workflow is to not think about meal preparation and rely on my wife in the hospital cafeteria. But the reason for that is because I hate the preparation of making meals. I don't like planning the meals. I don't like thinking about the ingredients and what I need to buy at the grocery store. It's not the cooking part, it's the preparation part. So this is a picture of the inside of my refrigerator. And these 3 pictures are the only ones that I used for this prompt. I uploaded them again with my phone directly to Claude and asked what meals I could make with what was visible. The results were pretty good, actually. It started by saying what it identified based on its analysis of pictures, and it grouped the items into categories, which was nice. It picked up on a majority of the items with just a few mistakes. So alternatives to this could have been just typing into AI everything that was in my refrigerator, but that would have taken longer. Regardless, sorry, I lost my place. Regardless, it gave me 2 options of the meals that I could make with the brief descriptions for the recipes to make them. The whole process took a minute and was done entirely on my phone. Prior to this, I would have spent that minute thinking about how I didn't want to do it and instead not done it. And obviously the output here isn't perfect, and the item identification is not totally complete or correct. and the recipes are incomplete and lack details, but this is just the start for 30 seconds of work. At this point, I could have then evaluated the output, corrected it so that it had accurate representation of what was in my refrigerator, and then once it had an accurate inventory, I could have had it spend a little more time working on the various recipes, telling it my preferences, providing the different stuff that I have available like spices or other unpictured items. Every example in this talk follows grossly the same formula. In a lot of ways, I've spent a lot of time saying the same things over and over again, which is identify something that takes time, give the AI context, get a first draft, and then refine it with your judgment. Think of AI as a research assistant that's fast, widely read, always available, but has no actual judgment and requires your supervision at every output. You wouldn't trust it to make decisions alone, but you also wouldn't spend your time doing the work that it could do for you. That's the practical value. AI is not a replacement, but AI is a time multiplier on tasks where you can verify the output. I put together 3 very rough tiers for deciding where AI can fit in your life. So you can use it freely for low stakes things like drafts, brainstorming, teaching preparation, and studying with constrained resources, where the hallucination risk is low or the consequences are minor. Use it with oversight for clinical documentation with review, or style question generation, diagnostic reasoning with verification, and patient communication templates. And don't use it for any task where there's no reliable second reviewer and the consequences for mistakes are high. These tiers are not rigid and depend entirely on your expertise and your level of risk tolerance, but the principle is the same. Know where the errors matter and adjust accordingly. So when setting out to make this talk, I set a goal of minimizing the quote-unquote bleeding edge advancements and applications of AI. So I'm just going to spend a few seconds on this. Just a brief look at where things are heading. Since the initial release of ChatGPT, the whole AI space for the general public has exploded, and there's a lot of competition, which is driving significant achievements at a rapid pace. The ChatGPT that we initially received, which couldn't even access the internet, has advanced tremendously over the course of just 3-ish years. They're completely different products. In parallel, the boundaries for AI utilization are being pushed in many other domains as well. Here's a couple examples in the surgical space. So there's company Moon Surgical. Their SCO pilot received FDA clearance in March of 2025 for autonomous camera driving during laparoscopy. The camera follows the operative field without requiring a human assistant. At Johns Hopkins, a team has performed multiple fully autonomous cholecystectomies ex vivo on cadaveric pig models with 100% success rate. These were done with no human hand assistance, and it maintained the ability to incorporate human verbal instructions as needed. We're not there for human patients, but the trajectory seems to be headed there. Finally, a group at UPMC developed a machine learning model trained on almost 1.5 million patients to predict surgical complications, and it achieved a performance greater than the NISQIP calculator with an AUROC of 0.945. Again, the point is not to discuss any of these individually, but to highlight the fact that the capability curve is moving fast. I'm not suggesting that AI is going to replace surgeons, but the pace of development and how AI is being increasingly utilized is worth staying current on. Now that I've discussed some of the pitfalls and downsides to AI, this is one that I want to discuss a little bit separately, and that is, what is the cost of using AI to us? If you use AI to draft every document, there is reasonable concern that you might lose or greatly diminish the skill of writing over time. If you use AI to study, do we lose the ability to synthesize information ourselves? Some of the most valuable thinking happens when you're working through a problem yourself. Outsourcing the first draft to AI may mean missing some of those moments of insight and forcing your brain to work. What is the cost of using a tool like DAX? Does it matter if medical students or interns are using DAX for notes versus senior residents? What about for the patients? Does it matter to them that their clinical documentation for their visit was AI generated? When you read a letter of recommendation for someone or an evaluation of someone's performance, does it matter that it was written with AI assistance? I personally believe that some of these things are worth doing without AI assistance. AI saves time, reduces friction, and improves efficiency, but efficiency is not free. The question is where to draw the line between the tasks that you delegate and the thinking that you protect. Truthfully, I don't have an answer for this myself. A third-year resident may benefit more from writing presentations independently than a chief resident managing 5 projects at once. But is that even true? Some things must still be worth doing the hard way. So with that, I wanted to thank my mentors and my friends throughout this program. everyone that's played a role in my training so far. And a special thanks to Dr. Ducan for helping me get used to AI tools. He is certainly one of the people here who knows way more about this than I do. And by far, most importantly, I can't thank my family enough for supporting me through this entire process. They've made the whole thing worth doing, and I couldn't have done it without them. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't be here because of our children. And for those of you who know me, you probably could have guessed there'd be more pictures of my kids. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
That was really a great talk, and it's the perfect talk for you. I mean, you've always been someone who was, you're exactly who I thought you were when we picked you. I don't know, what's it, 7 years? It feels like forever ago, because I guess you were a medical student here too. But and you've always been very interested in technology. You've always been very precise about it. You really embraced the robotics very, very early on, and so it was the perfect topic, and you hit it. And all the challenges that you talked about are the challenges that I face every day. Sometimes when I use it, I end up spending twice as much time than I spend on myself. But I think that's the learning curve we're talking about. The other thing, like especially that list of, authoritative and that list of all the mistakes that those are human errors too, right? We know people like that. All those the one that speaks with authority that says everything wrong. These are all human things as well. You did allude to a little at the very last slide, but this came up at the GME meeting when we were rolling out DAX to everybody. And there are programs that will not let their interns, for example, use DAX. So, and I have mixed emotions about that because I do have some concern that you don't learn, as you just talked about. On the other hand, it's the world we live in. And so you have to learn or function in the world we live in. It's like slide rules. When the calculators came out, people said, well, you have to use the slide rule, but no one uses the slide rule. So how do we decide that, I don't know, as surgical educators, as PDs and things like that, what we should allow you guys to be using, and where do we draw that line?
I personally think that's impossible to answer. The reason for that is because I actually thought about the example of the DAX notes quite a bit, reflecting on my own training, in that when you're learning to write notes initially, it takes longer because what you put in the note should reflect all the complex decision making and all the thought that's put into it. And sometimes when we have discussions with faculty, or it's like, I think we should do this, and the answer is like a thumbs up, it's hard for someone to get the feedback or to know exactly what the thought process was that you want to reflect in the note from the attending, as ultimately the attending will sign the note. And I think you can spend a lot of time trying to synthesize and learn and make a note that reflects the thought process. And that takes time for junior residents because they need to do a lot of work to do that. And I think that's where the learning happens. Whereas for a senior resident, seeing an appendectomy consult shouldn't take much time because it's usually not too complex. And so to answer that, I do think that there's a lot of value for junior residents, notes specifically, in writing the notes themselves. And I do think DAX will take away from that. That being said, like I said, we're supposed to be reviewing the notes that DAX makes. And so just because an intern is using DAX to help it generate some of the HPI elements, that doesn't mean that we should just be signing the assessment and plan without thinking about it. And so I think as long as we're thoughtful and everyone that's using it is thoughtful and reviewing the notes, it shouldn't really take away too much because you still have to put your ideas into it and make sure that AI is capturing them appropriately.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I think in terms of intern implementation, I think that there's immense utility in having someone learn the old-fashioned way, as it were, and for a couple of reasons. Because just as you said, you're developing the thought process, the quality standards, and ultimately at the end of the AI generation, the ability to determine if this is actually a real and a quality note and a good decision-making process, meaning that there's utility in interns learning how to take a full H&P and all this stuff, test in a plan the old-fashioned way, because then they can use it as a quality metric for whatever the generated AI output, versus if that process and decision-making is never learned, you're essentially just trusting the AI to do that for you, which is not very disappointing. That's one thought I have.
Then why does that stop at intern year or second year or third year or once you're in attending? I mean, I feel like none of us want to be the surgeon in 10 years that we are today, right? We're all trying to be better 10 years from now. does using this technology atrophy our ability to continue to grow and, become more refined in our decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the same argument, in parallel to the idea of using a dot phrase for an op note versus making someone dictate it from scratch. I do certainly think that there is value from dictating op notes, which is why I do that. But there's also a lot of time saved from using a dot phrase to pre-populate a lot of it.
Yeah,
So
I think my point is you should be able to generate it without the AI if it didn't exist. And then that's my quality standard. That's why I also don't share a lot of these things initially.
The $1 million question is, if you ask AI to make you a talk,
so the truth is I asked AI to generate an outline for this talk. And I probably spent more time using AI to make an outline than I would have if I just did the outline myself.
I have a question, Chris, and it was a great talk. Right now, I'm a section editor for textbook in colorectal surgery. It's like herding cats, getting people to update the, chapters, and it's like 3 years out of date. And I imagine this technology is probably going to make all that obsolete. But my guess is that it's pulling data from, maybe not that because it's behind a firewall, but as it all becomes AI generated, what do you think the future is of it without any human input? If textbooks are going to be a way of the past.
Well, yeah. So on one hand, it's hard to know where AI is going to go. So right now we face the problem of AI generating false data and all the various flaws that I talked about. But who knows what's going to happen in the future? So that in consideration. But also, I do think that a lot of this can be AI done now. So, just to go back to the notebook LM example of it making a podcast with a text chapter you provide, it was really weird listening to the podcast because it sounded like an actual podcast. And so what I uploaded it was the first chapter of the TSRA review book, which is one of the cardiothoracic surgery review books. And it was just on lung anatomy. And it was a typical, dry chapter on just anatomy. And it produced this podcast style format with AI generated voice that also made like metaphors for the anatomy. So it made this building anatomy for like an internal structure of a building metaphor for describing like bronchopulmonary segments, which was not in the textbook. It just generated that. And it was actually a pretty good learning tool. So I really do think that a lot of this stuff, if you can constrain the material and ensure that there's no hallucinations and have someone reviewing it, that it can save a lot of time. So for like a book chapter, for example, if you have like 5 people working on a book chapter, I imagine that there is a way right now that you could just take the sources that you want to use and have it synthesize those into a book chapter and then have one person review that.
Yeah, you got to be careful
Exactly.
because some of them where you're publishing tell you not to do that. So you just have to be upfront and look at the rules. But you're right.
Dr. McGarry.
So this is going to sound like a funny question, but there's something behind it. So could AI have generated the Beatles? And my point there is, because people know I'm a huge Beatles fan, and part of what people talked about AI is, what happens to creativity? Who's writing music? Who's creating the things that we derive joy from and learning and sharing? And so I simply asked that question because even as this is an incredible talk and there's just incredible things that can be learned in all of this stuff, but all of us are going to have to maintain our link to humanity as this moves forward. And even as I look at AI, I'll do Google and I'll see an AI thing, and my first response, not to the AI thing, is what's the information? It's how real is that for me right now? And I hope that as we as humans move forward, because because I'm getting towards the end of the line right here. Soon, not right away, but soon. I'm really hoping that humanity remains and can be directed in a positive way.
Yeah, one of the reasons I was a little hesitant to give this talk was because I'm also kind of sick of seeing AI generated text that is clearly not, people didn't put a lot of thought into. And so like, I imagine the example of, you're a program director and you're receiving letters of recommendation for medical students for residency. If it sounds like AI generated text, like, does that change how you view it? I think the answer is yes, like personally. I'd rather see something with typos and grammatical errors, and that's maybe, I don't know, a third of the length, but that is written by an actual person, rather than seeing something that's well written, but clearly AI generated.
The thing you just mentioned, though, is maybe that's bad AI, and that there's even more layers we're gonna have to be careful of.
Yeah.
Well, isn't the bad part about that, if it is super realistic, right? So if it is super accurate and super realistic and sounds like a human, you don't, if you're the program director reviewing that letter of recommendation, you don't know if that is what the person actually thinks about the other person, right? I mean, you know what AI thinks is a good letter of recommendation for this person.
I think it's not a matter of when you get to that point, that degree. It's gonna happen. It is, for the progressive rate of this in the past 3 years, in the past 6 months, it's truly incredible. Scary.
Chris, thank you for a wonderful talk. I think one thing I've noticed when we talked about it in the OR, we're both both people that like to pursue technology for efficiency. I think that will help us for convenience, but at the same time, I think we have to be careful about sort of how it affects on creativity. So, I appreciate your insight.
Is you have to make a mad dash to change, like,
No.